Welcome to the 2020 Ontario Realtor Party Speaker Series, brought to you by Zillow. Now here's our host, ORPSS CEO, Tim Hudak.
Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final episode of the Ontario Realtor Party Speaker Series. We hope to make this the best one yet. I'm Tim Hudak, coming to you from Toronto. I hope you've enjoyed tuning into Canada's leading public affairs conference. It was our first time doing it virtually. I think it went great, but we do look forward to seeing you live in person at our next conference in Toronto, where we will have another lineup of some of the biggest names in Canadian and U.S. politics. As one of Ontario's most civically engaged professions, OREA is proud to offer realtors cutting-edge and exclusive content aimed at helping you understand how politics impacts your business and impacts the lives of your clients. We've got another epic lineup of speakers today. Look, I've got two leaders of political parties here in Ontario on today's show. Also, the cabinet minister leading the Ford government's push to make homeownership more affordable. He'll be with me. And I'm very excited about this. Canada's 18th Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, will take the stage. But first, making your association work better for you. That was a project started by the OREA Board of Directors just 4 years ago. Back then, OREA launched a new strategic plan that charted a bold path for your association. It was a path that focused on becoming Ontario's best association in advocacy and delivering high-impact services for members like standard forms and leadership training. And I'm happy to say we are well on our way to accomplishing that goal. Here to tell us more about it is Ottawa Realtor and the President-elect of OREA, David Oikel. Welcome to the series, David.
Good morning, Tim.
Morning, David. All right, that path began for OREA in 2016, and it really took off through a watershed strategic plan in 2017 that set an association on that bold new path. You were there at the table, a newly elected OREA director at the time. You're now the President-elect. So tell us about that moment.
Well, Tim, it was really an exciting time. I'd been a director for just a month when we did that strategic plan, and it was really an exciting moment in time for our association. The board, under past President Ray Ferris, decided we needed a new vision and new leadership. They hired a new CEO, and together our association was set on a new path. And it's a good thing, too, because later that year, RICO decided to end the contract for delivery of registration education. Education had defined OREA for over 30 years. So the OREA team got to work and started to build a new association, one that was focused on stronger financial discipline. We cut spending on hospitality and travel and invested that on services that members care about. That led to a focus on our core products and services, advocacy, standard forms, and building better leaders. Beginning in 2017, OREA increased our investment in those services, and that increased investment, that new plan, well, it worked. Just in advocacy alone, we've achieved major victories for our members, culminating in the passing of the most pro-realtor, pro-consumer legislation in North America, the Trust in Real Estate Services Act, and after a decade of work, the implementation of a gold standard of personal real estate corporations, a huge win for members. Tim, it's been an exciting 4 years of work here at OREA, and as President-elect, I can tell you that we are looking to deliver even more for members in the years ahead.
That's incredible work. And like we say, real results for realtors. David, for your leadership, that of the board, and I've been really lucky to work with our past presidents like Ray Ferris, who you mentioned, Ettore Cardarelli, David Reed, Karen Cox, and our 2020 President Sean Morrison really knocking it out of the park during these crazy times of COVID. All right, you talked about the road ahead, but let's pause for a second and look at the here and now. I mean, we are in the midst of a historic global pandemic, and we don't know when it's going to end. How has OREA stepped up? How are you helping members and their communities during this unprecedented time?
It's a great question, Tim. Our number one priority at OREA during this pandemic is to make sure members know that we have their back. Since the pandemic began, we've been laser focused on helping our members and member boards through these difficult times. In May, the OREA Board of Directors approved a total of $1.4 million in COVID-19 relief funding for members. That relief funding supported critical legal guidance for members on things like open houses, showings, and landlord-tenant issues. Members really responded well to that, so we're looking at ways of continuing to offer that service post-pandemic. But I'm also really proud of the fact that we were leaders when it came to keeping our members and their clients safe, and I know that the feedback we received on our guidance materials was extremely positive. Our COVID relief funding also went to new products and services aimed at helping members where they need it most. For example, we gave all 80,000 members access to LifeWorks by Morneau Chappelle, which provides 24/7 support from mental health professionals. That's a service that is available to members right now up until November 30th of this year, and one we're looking to possibly extend into the new year. Oh, and I can't forget to mention, as you know, Tim, a lot of charities and community organizations are hurting right now because of the pandemic. So OREA donated $480,000 to the Ontario Realtors Care Foundation, and working with our member boards, we got that funding in the hands of over 35 shelter-based charities in a matter of weeks. That is something all members should be really proud of.
Yeah, that was impressive to see Ontario Realtors leading the way in rebuilding their communities. I think the first profession out of the gate to do that. All right, last question. Before you go, David, tell us a bit about what you're looking forward to. You'll be becoming president in March of next year. And then give members a sense of what we could expect to see in terms of some of these new products and services you mentioned a minute ago.
Well, Tim, I'm really looking forward to working with the team and the board of directors, and I anticipate a great year ahead. The board just wrapped up a post-college OREA strategic planning session that is putting these ideas into action. That strategic plan is focused on building on those core strengths of advocacy, standard forms, and leadership training, but also coming out of COVID, looking at some unique product offerings that will really help members in their business. We'll have more to announce in the coming months, but I'm really excited about the road ahead, and I can't wait to give members more updates after the board has finalized our plan.
David, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for stepping up. Thank you for being a great leader, and just terrific to have you joining us on the series here today.
It's been my pleasure, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next, I will talk to the new leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Stephen Del Duca, and I'm going to find out how he is planning for the 2022 provincial election. And stick around too, because I'm going to ask him where he stands on a municipal land transfer tax. Back after this.
Two.
Welcome back. On March 7th, 2020, Stephen Del Duca won the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party. Stephen previously served as an MPP from 2012 to 2018 and was a Minister of Transportation, as well as a Minister of Economic Development and Growth under Premier Kathleen Wynne. Since taking on the leadership, Stephen has been working hard to rebuild the party while also being a very effective opposition voice at Queen's Park. Stephen Del Duca, welcome to the Speaker Series.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, well then watch out for this. Here's the first hard-hitting question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so tell our audience one thing about you that they would not know from Wikipedia or putting Stephen Del Duca through Google.
Well, I'll tell you, I think the Wikipedia page might mention already that my wife and daughters and I own a dog, but just a few days ago, we got a second dog, a little yellow lab named Sammy that we picked up, brand new puppy from a lovely breeder up in Powassan, Ontario. So I've got a northern dog here at home. If you happen to hear some barking or yelping in the background, it's the new puppy. We have two dogs. So I got two daughters, two dogs, and we love it. We love him.
Oh, that's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah.
Any secrets you want to share on properly raising a puppy?
Well, I've learned the hard way to keep my shoes inside the cupboard with the doors closed. I've had far too many casualties over the years.
All right, Mr. Leader, there are thousands of realtors who are watching us today. So many of them are going to know you from senior cabinet roles at Queen's Park, but others may not. So for people meeting Stephen Del Duca for the very first time, let them know why you want to be premier of our great province of Ontario.
Thanks for that question, Tim. I've spent my entire life here in Ontario. I'm born and raised in the GTA, and I think back to all the incredible opportunity that I had, my siblings had growing up here, because of the hard work and dedication of my grandparents and my parents, who all came from different parts of the world. My dad's family, my dad himself from Italy, my mom and her family from Scotland. And I think about the daughters that my wife and I are raising, and I am absolutely determined to fight as hard as I possibly can to make sure that Talia and Grace have the same kind, if not even better opportunity than I had growing up here. And I believe that our provincial government has a very important role to play in order to make sure that that kind of genuine opportunity for all is passed on to the next generation. That's what motivates me. That's what I'm in this fight for. That's what I'm going to keep working hard for.
So Italian and Scott background, that must have been a lot of good arguments around the kitchen table growing up.
There still are. We're not arguing. We just talk this way. It's all good.
So you won the Liberal leadership on the very first ballot. It took me 3 times, 3 ballots to win, but I've been down that road. And I know how challenging it is when you try to bring all sides of a party together behind a new leader. So congratulations on your bold vision, your success in re-energizing the Ontario Liberal Party. Just 10 days after you won the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party, we hit the state of emergency, shut down businesses, all in-person meetings. So give us a bit of a look into the back room. What was it like to take the helm of a major political party right in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, it's been a really incredible journey so far. As you pointed out, I won the leadership on the Saturday. On the Monday of that week, which would have been the 9th, I started to go back on tour, hit the ground running as I had promised to do. I was in Windsor and then Ottawa and then Thunder Bay on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week. By the time that I flew home late on the Wednesday night from Thunder Bay, it was already quite evident that the pandemic was just about to engulf and disrupt everything in Ontario. We suspended my touring in that moment on the Wednesday or the Thursday of that week. And then all of the work, for the most part, for the next number of months, until just about the middle of August, when the province moved back into stage 3 for the first time, all of my touring, all of my leading, for the most part, was done from where I'm sitting right now, which is at my dining room table at home, where my wife and daughters and I live in Vaughan, just on the edge of Toronto. So quite a remarkable journey so far. I will say I've been greatly encouraged. Our caucus, including the 2 members of our caucus who also sought the leadership, Michael Coteau and Mitzi Hunter, have done incredible work. We've started to nominate our candidates. We've started slowly but surely with a platform development process. We made membership in our party free for the very first time in our history. So we've made some pretty remarkable strides in a short period of time, but we still have a ton of work to do as Ontario Liberals, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this journey.
All right, well, let's continue to talk about the work ahead. We're now 1 year and 7 months away from the next Ontario election. So what do you do as leader to get ready for that next election, and any sneak previews? I mean, what can voters expect from the Stephen Del Duca Liberal Party platform?
Yeah, so we're going to officially launch a grassroots-driven platform process probably very early in 2021. We're looking at the team that I have, the group of volunteers that are around me and helping me right now, are looking at launching something very early in the new year that really brings in the party membership and people from outside the party to lend their expertise, advice, and input to a platform that I'm really hoping will be, and I expect will be, captivating and compelling for the people of Ontario. I really strongly believe that election campaigns are about the future, not about relitigating the past. And so I think it's incredibly important that Ontario Liberals put in front of the people of Ontario, come the next election campaign, a positive forward-looking plan for how we move Ontario forward on the other side of the pandemic, how we have a sustained and successful recovery on the economic and social side, and how we make sure that the most vulnerable, those who've been battered most badly by this pandemic, have a real, genuine shot at the kind of economic dignity that every Ontarian deserves.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I appreciate you've always been one with a very open door to Ontario realtors as a senior cabinet minister and now as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. We appreciate that, and we look forward to participating in that policy process in the time ahead before the next election campaign. Before we talk a bit more about that planning, just a few days ago, Mr. Leader, we had the provincial budget on how to fight back against the pandemic. Like your take as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party about that provincial budget.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the budget, Tim. Here's what I would tell you. I had certain expectations of a budget in this moment and the crisis that Ontario and Ontario families are facing. I was pretty deeply disappointed in what I saw in the budget. I think there are many categories of vulnerable Ontarians right now. We know, for example, that we have seniors living in nursing homes, incredibly vulnerable, heartbreaking, tragic stories that we've seen throughout the pandemic. We know that far too many lives have been lost during the pandemic in those nursing homes, lots of grieving families. And what I saw in the budget tells me that, frankly, Doug Ford and his team don't recognize that this is an urgent priority that needs to be dealt with in an all hands on deck moment right now, as opposed to waiting 2, 3, 4, 5 years to deliver on increases in the hours of care. I think of publicly funded education. It's so important. It's the thing I've been talking about most since July and August. We need a hard cap on class sizes so students can remain safe, so their parents have peace of mind going back to work, so frontline educators and education workers are also kept safe. I saw nothing in the budget that actually speaks to that need for smaller class sizes. And even though I know there was support in the budget for small businesses, which is long overdue, I am very hopeful. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm hopeful that that kind of support will be easy to understand, access, and navigate for small business entrepreneurs. But the flip side of the small business challenge that we face in Ontario are the literally thousands of workers, particularly in tourism, hospitality, the service sector, disproportionately impacting women, people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, who really need a helping hand at this critical moment. And again, I saw nothing in this budget that makes me think that Doug Ford recognizes that that needs to be a priority too. So I consider the budget to be a betrayal of those people who need a premier and a government at Queen's Park that's on their side. And I'm going to keep pushing Doug Ford hard to do the right thing.
Very good. Let's switch up gears a little bit and talk a bit more about, what informs you as a leader and how you make decisions. So prior to politics, you worked for the Carpenters Council here in Ontario. So you know all about the importance of construction and housing to our economy. And I know from seeing you in the legislature, as an MPP, minister, and now leader, you've talked a lot about support for affordable home ownership, the value of having a place to call home for Canadians. And I was very impressed that during the leadership, you actually had an op-ed in the Toronto Sun talking about that very issue of home ownership. You talked about construction sites that you'd visit with your dad when you were a kid, he was then overseeing the building of high-rise condos and mid-sized apartments and townhomes. And what you said, Mr. Leader, in that piece, I'll quote here, quote, "I didn't grasp it fully at the time, but I look back now and realize that in perhaps a small but also meaningful way, your dad was doing his part to help thousands of people of all age ranges and incomes achieve their dream of home ownership." So when you think about your dad and that memory, how has that shaped your leadership and how you look at home ownership today?
Yeah, it's something that I look back on those memories fondly. What I didn't mention in the op-ed is that from the age of 16 until about 23 or so, every single summer, frankly, even March breaks, I had the opportunity to work on many of those construction sites. Of course, my responsibilities were mostly in the area of unskilled labor, which is consistent with a lot of the expertise and abilities that I have. But it did give me that firsthand opportunity to see that it is so critically important for those who aspire to own their own homes in an affordable way in communities where they want to live, that it's so important for government to do its part to help enable that outcome. And I think that we've in many ways, we've lost a little bit of that feeling. We've lost sight of that goal and objective. And so I think it does fall to governments at all levels, working with Ontario's realtors and others in the building industry to make sure, and frankly, the skilled trades, to make sure that we are collectively pushing towards helping people realize that goal. It's so important, I think, as an anchor in people's lives. And I think we have a lot of work that needs to be done. We have to stop just delivering platitudes on this. And I'm saying this as a politician, and actually try to find a meaningful way to deliver outcomes. And I don't think we're there yet.
And last question, because I know you have to run, Mr. Leader, to your work as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, but this is an issue near and dear to our members' hearts, and one we've fought for very hard over the years. And you stated your opposition to the municipal land transfer tax in the past, which we deeply appreciated. Is that still the case? Would you oppose giving a municipal land transfer tax to other cities and towns in the province if you were to form the Stephen Del Duca Liberal government?
Yeah, I'm absolutely opposed to extending that kind of taxing power to municipalities. One of the keys to success on the housing and affordable housing front, or housing affordability front, is to not make the situation any worse, not add any more burdens to those outcomes. And that's something that I'm committed to delivering on 100%.
Well, we appreciate your stand against additional taxes on home ownership and your belief, working there with your dad in the construction sites, in the value of a great place to call home. Stephen Del Duca, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And as a strong supporter of the Canadian dream of home ownership in our province, we look forward to working with you and the Ontario Liberal Party in the days ahead. Congratulations on all your success through 2020, and all the best to your family in the time ahead.
Thank you so much, Tim. You stay safe, and all the best to you as well.
Good to see you again.
You too. Thank you.
All right, coming up next, what can government do to make housing more affordable? Stick around, because I will ask that and more to Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Minister Steve Clark. We'll be right back after this. Housing is an economic engine. Realtors have a plan to put it to work to benefit all Ontarians. Our plan will get more homes on the market, get people spending in the economy again, offer support to communities that need it the most, and contribute to a strong economic recovery for all Ontario. You can read our plan at orea.com/COVID recovery. Welcome back. Last year, the Ontario government passed the most pro-homeownership legislation in a generation. It was called the More Homes, More Choice Act. This historic legislation was designed to finally end the housing supply crisis that has kept the dream of homeownership out of reach for far too many Ontario families. In 2018, OREA drafted a bold plan called Saving the Canadian Dream of Homeownership in Ontario. And get this, 8 out of the 10 ideas we put on the table in our plan, they found their way into that legislation. Joining me today is a guy that we got to say thank you to for that. He is the quarterback of the More Homes, More Choice Act, got it through the legislature, and he's Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark. Minister, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks so much for having me. I just want to give a shout out to all your membership. You're all doing such a fantastic job.
Well, thank you for delivering. I got a bunch of questions about that legislation, but I know this weekend was a very important day for you. So from all the Ontario Realtors, happy birthday. And if my remembrance is correct, it was also a big milestone for you. So happy big 4-0.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Thanks. You're my favorite for sure. I appreciate that number. So yeah, it was great. Great opportunity to celebrate with family in a much reduced COVID environment. So did some Zoom calls too. So thanks.
Yeah.
Very kind of you.
Well, that's very sweet. And I know.
Happy belated birthday to you.
Thank you very much. And I know. Look, I've known you for a long time, and public service is something that really drives you. But the value that you have above that is family. And just looking behind you, you've got those gorgeous pictures of family. I see a strong resemblance as well. So we got to ask you, how are Deanna and the kids doing, and how about the grandkids?
Well, thanks, Tim. I hope Deb and Miller and Maitland and your family are doing well. Everything's Dee and I are doing great. Obviously, it was interesting. We were at a very sad situation pre-COVID. We had to go to a funeral, and Deanna was lamenting that, because of the schedule at the legislature and as a minister, she never gets to see me. She doesn't get to have a meal with me. So who would have thought right after with COVID-19, she'd have to share 3 meals with me in the house here in Brockville. But everybody's doing well. The kids are doing well. The grandkids, we've got 4 grandkids now. 2 of them are in the riding. They live in Maitland. Same,
there you go.
As your daughter's name. And then 2 are out west. 2 grandkids are out west with my son and his wife in Edmonton. But everybody's doing well. Everybody's healthy and happy. And things have really changed. We've had to connect with our kids out west via Zoom, and Megan is in London, Caitlin's in Toronto, so I get to see her. The boys, 2 of the boys are here, the twins. So it is certainly different. We don't obviously get to connect as everyone does, but everyone's well, and I hope your family's well too, Tim. You got a great 2 beautiful daughters, and Deb's just fantastic. I'm so happy to have you and your family connection with me. So you're just a fantastic guy. So
thanks for saying that. And thank you. You referenced Maitland. I remember you asked me if Maitland was named after the community in your riding, and where she was conceived and why we named her. That's private matter, not for the broadcast here in the Realtor Party Conference. All right, just before Housing Minister, and you've done a fantastic job in paving the way for greater home ownership in the province, more rentals. But let's talk COVID-19 for a second. So you're there really at the center. You're there as one of the Premier's key advisors on the Jobs and Recovery Committee cabinet, and you've got to deal with the pandemic every day. So I want to ask you, as somebody with a lot of experience in government, how has COVID-19 changed the way the government operates, and how does it feel to be at that decision-making table in the center of the storm?
Well, Tim, that's a great question. I think whether you're, been in government for a couple of years, like some of my colleagues have been, or you've been there for decades, there's really no playbook for these unprecedented times. And I know that I overuse the word unprecedented, but the one thing I can say, and it's because I started in municipal politics at a very young age. And worked with government at all levels. I have never seen the 3 levels of government work so closely as they have during the pandemic. And I don't think people really realize to the extent that the 3 levels of government have been as collaborative as they have been. And, the one thing that Premier Ford said to me that very first weekend was communication is key. And, a day doesn't go by that I don't talk or text or Zoom or FaceTime or WebEx or Microsoft Teams with a local mayor or a housing stakeholder where I don't connect with someone in another riding or at another level of government. It's really, I know I overuse the word, but it is unprecedented. And I think people really need to understand that all 3 levels of government are putting politics aside, no matter what political stripe, and just trying to get done the right things. And that's to me, I've never seen that in the times that I've been in and around government over my lifetime. So it's good for people to realize that collaboration's taking place.
Well, it's refreshing to hear. We thank you for your role in that. Okay, housing. So it was just over a year ago. I remember being there for the press conference. It was a home construction site in Scarborough, where you announced your intention to introduce the More Homes, More Choice Act. I mean, it is a truly historic piece of legislation to take on Ontario's housing supply crisis head on by bringing more supply of housing into the marketplace and more affordable housing. So now that it's been a full year since that act became law in Ontario under your leadership, I wanted to ask you, how do you think we've done so far?
I think we've done fantastic. Who would have thought we be where we are when we made that first announcement in Scarborough at that Habitat for Humanity build. It was actually a build with everyone was wearing pink hats because it was every worker that was on the site was a woman. And it was just so inspiring to see a nonprofit like Habitat build such an ambitious project. When we introduced More Homes, More Choice as part of our Housing Supply Action Plan to address the housing needs of our province, it was a system that was neglected for many years by the previous government. We knew we had to deal with housing supply, housing mix, by making it easier and faster to build the right type of housing in the right place at a price people could afford. It's such a pivotal piece of what our government has been able to accomplish, and the examples of the success. Even I, am overwhelmed at some of the successes that we've had. We look at the data regarding housing starts. They've increased from approximately 17,000 when we released the plan in the second quarter of 2019 to nearly 25,000 by the third quarter of this year. So it's an increase of almost 50%. And then you look at the other part of the Housing Supply Action Plan. We made decisive action that the construction of purpose-built rental in Ontario, something that many families rely on. We've been at sort of an all-time low in terms of construction, and the rental housing progress that we've made has been just unbelievable. And I don't care what metric you use. I don't care whether you use CMHC or RBC or Urban8, like whoever you use, you can look that we had almost 10,000 rental starts. That's the most, Tim, we've seen since 1992. And if you even look at what happened this year, we can show some higher totals. We've already had about 8,500 rental starts in the first 3 quarters of this year, and that's in the middle of a pandemic. So we've seen incremental improvements right across the board. And one of the things that we were very bold about was the fact that we're not afraid to talk about more homes, more choice, increasing jobs. And the construction industry is a huge generator. And I think during COVID-19, we've seen some pretty spectacular numbers being brought forward. So it's worked out extremely well to date.
I mean, that's great to hear about private ownership and, of course, purpose-built rental. As you said, we want to see people find a great place to call home, across the spectrum. And I know that the realtors have spoken with you, home construction. They pointed out that in the past, it could take like a decade to get the necessary approvals before you could start putting a shovel in the ground for a standard single-family home. So how does a More Homes, More Choice Act enhance that approval process, get things going faster? And then what's next on your radar to get things done quicker?
Yeah, and that's another, it's a huge priority for me. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to an MPP or a mayor, a real estate professional, somebody in the development business with an excruciating story about how long it takes to get housing to market. And that's why, as part of More Homes, More Choice, we made some very big changes on timelines for development. We gave municipalities 120 days for official plans, 90 days for zoning bylaws, 120 days for plans of subdivision. We streamlined third-party appeals. Like you have to have reasonable timeframes for municipalities to work under. I understand that. I'm a former mayor, but I'm also a former CAO, so I understand that. But we have to also ensure that builders have the certainty that they need to get housing online faster. And that was part of really what we looked at when we did More Homes, More Choice. Additionally, the COVID-19 Recovery Act that was passed provided my ministry with additional authority around zoning outside of the Greenbelt. These are very important measures because, especially in COVID-19, I believe very strongly that municipalities will be leading in the recovery. We have to reduce potential barriers. We have to reduce approval delays. And we've seen the approval process that there's more that we can do. That even though we've made these improvements that I've spoken about as part of the Housing Supply Action Plan, I know that I have to sit my brother and sister ministers down, and we have to start looking at the approval process. And the other thing that I think is very, very important is this whole concept of e-permitting, that we need to get our municipalities, now that they've experienced what they've had to endure during the pandemic, we've got to be able to get them more tuned in about having an e-permitting system to try to streamline the process. And we're going to continue to work with them. Obviously, I've got some planning tools that I'm not afraid to use, because I think we need to keep the economy going. We're in the middle of the second wave, and I think we all acknowledge that COVID-19 isn't all of a sudden we're going to wake up next week and it's going to be gone. I think we realize that we've got to continue to put measures in place to streamline development and get more homes online faster.
And Minister Clark, when you read the media, it's a perception that housing supply and affordability are problems that are just for downtown Toronto or the GTHA. But, we know, and you know, that housing is important right across Ontario. You and I both come from small towns. You're in Brockville. I'm from Fort Erie. And there's always been something to say about being able to afford a home in the neighborhood where you grew up. But for many Ontarians in smaller communities, that's slipping away. So what can we do to keep housing affordable in smaller towns?
And that's again a fantastic question. It's something that we look at every day, as you rightly said. I live in a small town. I was mayor of Brockville. I was president of AMO, and now as a minister, I understand that there are huge challenges in front of us. As a government, we committed to work with municipalities to address some of these housing solutions. We had extensive consultations with the Housing Supply Action Plan. And one of the things that came up was the fact that we needed to turn our mind to the provincial policy statement. And the new PPS that took effect on May 1st, 2020 includes a variety of areas to reflect our province's changing needs, including increasing the supply and mix of housing and supporting rural, northern, and Indigenous communities. And you look at some of the other measures that we reviewed, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the fact that we've added a new land needs assessment. We've looked at every facet of the planning process and tried to look at it in how can we support some of the things that municipal partners have been telling us need to get changed. And, we've really come a long way, but again, I hate to say this again, there's much more that we have to do. And I think, the things like the growth plan, the PPS were good starts. We need to now drill down with our municipal partners on, what else can we do to assist you? How else can we foster this partnership for affordable housing? We've got, lots of challenges ahead of us, but, never in my time have I seen more municipal politicians, provincial politicians, and federal politicians talk about the need for investment in housing, affordable housing, all types, all mixes, in communities all over our province. So it is a good place to be right now for a minister of housing with all that great political will.
Well, we're glad that you're there. And good thing that you got that ball rolling, right? That we're seeing now, and you can see this at areacovid19info.com. We're doing monthly polling on consumer sentiment, and you're seeing an increased interest of people moving to smaller communities, rural communities, or Northern Ontario. So you got the head start on that for sure, and a more balanced approach to the housing supply issue. I want to talk a little bit about the landlord and tenant issues, and a big part of your focus during the pandemic has been keeping people safe. And that means making sure that people who are tenants safe in their homes and they have stability. But we also know that many residential landlords are individuals who maybe they're renting out the basement to help pay down their mortgage, or families who buy a second unit to earn income for their retirement. And since being elected, what are you doing, Minister, to help these small mom and pop landlords?
First of all, I want to say to the mom and pop landlords, I want to thank them for all that they've done to work with tenants during COVID-19. One thing we've all learned is that people in this environment during the pandemic needed a safe place to call home, to rest at home, and mom and pop landlords have been really on the front line. So I first of all want to thank them for everything they've done. Again, part of our housing supply action plan is to build the right type of housing in the right places. I talked about purpose-built rental and some of our success. Some of the other success I think we're seeing is we heard from people very strongly that they wanted opportunity. They wanted opportunity to create, for example, second units in their homes, to renovate a basement for a loved one, or maybe in reverse, maybe a senior who wants to stay in their home and needs a little extra income to help keep them there. We created adding a second unit to your home guide, very, very popular, because to some the building code can be a bit of a daunting document. So we broke it down to try to make it easier for someone who was thinking about creating that second unit, the opportunity for them to do so. The other aspect was Bill 184, the Protecting Tenants and Strengthening Community Housing Act, that was tabled before the pandemic, but we felt strongly about making sure it got passed as soon as possible. So we passed it, this summer. Bill 184 had a number of measures to encourage landlords and tenants to work together. We added some measures to streamline the landlord-tenant board, not to restrict someone from the right to have a hearing, but just to modernize some of the things. For goodness sakes, one of the maybe some of your members won't know this, but for goodness sake, there was one section where it still required the documents to be submitted on a CD-ROM. Now, I'm old enough, I know what a CD-ROM is, but I'm telling you, I know probably a lot of people that are watching this, will look at you and say, what's this guy talking? What's this old guy talking about? But that was the type of change that we needed to put into the landlord-tenant board. We needed to streamline this process so that both landlords and tenants had that certainty. But certainly, again, the government does play a valuable role in housing, but we want to make sure that both landlords and tenants feel like they're supported by government. So that's why we tabled that bill. That's why we put some of the other measures into the Housing Supply Action Plan that supported that.
Mr. Clark, I want to say thank you and congratulations, too, on the provincial budget delivered last Thursday in the legislature. I mean, as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, you would have been one of the key advisors in cabinet to the finance minister and the premier. So when you looked over the budget on Thursday and through this past weekend, what do you think the most important parts of the budget are for Ontario families in general, and particularly for the Ontario realtors here who are looking out for them?
I think there's a lot of good things, and I want to thank OREA and all your members. Fantastic engagement with MPPs. I think you're one of the best organizations in the last 6 months to organize, Zoom meetings and other touch points with government, yourself, Matt, everybody involved with OREA, all the staff have been just great with us. I think one of the exciting points is the seniors home safety tax credit. I think that was something that obviously I think your members wanted something a little more expensive. I think this is a fantastic start. It gives seniors the opportunities to put ramps or grab bars into their home, give them a chance to get a rebate. If they spend up to $10,000, they can get $2,500 back. I think it's a really good opportunity for someone who wants to stay in their home, or again, someone who wants to have a parent stay with them, is that it gives you some incentive to make those improvements. I think some of the business property tax stuff is very exciting as somebody who came from the municipal sector, and to allow your municipal partners to propose the ability to cut property tax for small businesses. I think this stuff is a game changer. These are things that have been talked about for years and years and years, and now we've been able to have Minister Phillips package them in a bill. I think that's those are game changers. The biggest one, obviously, and we're conducting this on Zoom. I've been a big advocate because I was in the internet business briefly in the 90s when I was at the newspaper. The access to broadband, as Minister of Municipal Affairs, number one issue at AMO in August, number one, every municipality, common issue. One of the few times I've seen it in my lifetime where AMO has had one common issue. The fact that we put $300 million on the table, and then we put another $680 million, almost $1 billion on the table by the provincial government, really sets the stage for the federal government to honor their election commitment. And I'm sure they will. And I have no doubt that they won't. But it just now there's no opposition. We put our money where our mouth is. Our communities want safe, reliable broadband. They need it. And I think that is probably the biggest game changer. It's a big game changer in rural Ontario, where I'm from. But I think there are pockets everywhere in our beautiful province that need this improvement. And I think that announcement, better than anything, sets up all of us for future success and a real competitive advantage. And that was the one thing that kept me up at night. Being in Eastern Ontario, I've got Quebec on one side, I've got my neighbors to the south. All of those areas, New York State was talking about a faster service than the federal government was talking. So I think now we're in a lot better place to compete, certainly with my competitors in Eastern Ontario. I'm sure everyone in different corners of Ontario feel the same way.
No, you're right on the money. I mean, the top question, Minister, that our realtors in smaller towns and northern communities or lakefront properties get from potential buyers is, how's the internet service? So this is like bang on. Great to see in the budget. And thanks for what you did around the seniors renovation tax credit and the lower business taxes to help out the commercial industrial sectors. Those were big asks as part of our government relations team, seeing ministers like yourself and MPPs across Queen's Park. All right, let me wrap up with a bit of a personal question, if you don't mind. Personal for me too, because you were the first MPP elected under my leadership in a by-election, and well, the first is always a favorite, right? So I've
100%.
So I've seen you in action as a colleague, and now as a partner in housing. And just watching you, Steve, and the way you operate, you've got a personal motivation around the ability for families to find a great place to call home. So, what is behind that drive? Why is that part of your character?
Well, again, thanks for the kind words, Tim. And I wear with a badge of honor that I was your number one elected MPP when you were a leader. My motivation, as you know, when I was in opposition for 8 years, very frustrated on this file. The fact that it is such a huge problem for young families, seniors worried about staying in their home, to be able to realize the dream of homeownership to me is one of the most important aspects of all of us in our lives. And we had to have a government that, first of all, wasn't ashamed of saying that there's a housing supply crisis, that there's a housing mix problem, that things take too long to get built. Some cases are too expensive to do business. Someone had to take this very complex problem and get it done. And when the Premier and I talked about me taking this portfolio on, this is something that is a drive of mine, that I think we have so much opportunity, so many things we can do in this space, that I wanted to get something right out of the gate very quickly. And I now look, especially now because of COVID, 2 years into the mandate, it's one of the biggest pieces of public policy that our government has done since being elected in June of 2018. And that makes me proud because, I only think I'm part way. I've got lots more things that I think we need to get done to make sure that more people can realize that dream of homeownership. And I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure we put policies in place that are putting people in the home so they can realize their dreams. So it is a passion for me, but when I get my mind on something, I'm going to get it done.
That is very true.
Happen.
Very true. Now, Minister, music to our ears, and you've really driven the ball down the field. We thank you, and it's exciting to hear that you're saying, just keep watching me, more to come. Thank you so much for speaking to thousands of realtors across the province here today. And I've said it many times, but I'm going to say it again. This government has been the most pro-homeownership government that we've seen in a generation. I want to thank you personally, to you and your team, for your leadership, and we look forward to working with you in the days ahead.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks to everyone who's watching. You're doing a great job. If I was to steal a line from the Premier, you're all true champions. So all the best.
Thank you, Minister. All right, up next, you'll hear from Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario, about housing, the 2022 election, and why he stood with realtors in support of Tressa. Right back after this.
For over a decade, OREA has fought to permit personal real estate corporations in Ontario. From thousands of emails to MPPs, to hundreds of meetings with decision makers, and passing the most pro-consumer and pro-realtor legislation in North America, your provincial association left no stone unturned to get PRECs done. For you. The result? We did it! On October 1st, 2020, the province changed the law to allow realtors to be able to form PRECs. It's one of OREA's biggest advocacy wins in our history. It means members who can benefit from a PREC can take advantage of new tools and opportunities that will lower their tax burden and help them invest more in their business. There's a lot you need to know before you decide to incorporate. OREA is here to support members with information to help them get the best advice about this historic change. Visit orea.com/PRECS to learn more.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Mike Schreiner, the MPP for Guelph, and of course, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario. Mike made history in 2018 when he became the first member of the Green Party of Ontario ever elected to the legislature. He's doing a fantastic job at Queen's Park. He's appeared at our conference the past 2 years, so here for the hat trick, Mike Schreiner, welcome back to the Realtor Party Conference.
Hey, Tim, it's a pleasure to be back. And just a shout out to OREA for the great work that you do, and to realtors all across Ontario. You know, not only do you provide really valuable service to your clients, but you make an important contribution to our community. So thank you.
Well, it's very, very kind of you to say, and thank you back. It's just been great to work with you. You've been kind enough to meet with our GR committee. I know our Guelph area realtors really enjoy their relationship with you and how you fight for them and the people they represent. So right off the top, a lot of people watching today will know you, and they've seen you in action, but they probably don't know that you grew up on a farm in Wakini, Kansas. So my first question is, how the heck did a guy coming from the Midwestern U.S. end up leading the Green Party here in Ontario?
Yeah, it's not the usual road you would think somebody would take to the Ontario legislature. Tim, I moved here for love in the mid-1990s when I was in my mid-20s, and I just fell in love with Ontario. I love the people, I love the landscape, and decided this was the right place for me to, you know, raise a family, start a business, and have a wonderful life. And so, you know, it was really a good choice, to be quite honest with you, and especially on a political note, when you see everything that's going on in the U.S. right now, just the division, the negative partisanship, and everything else, I think I made the right choice to live in Ontario. And if I was ever going to get involved in politics, Ontario is certainly a better place to do it than back home where I grew up.
Well, Wakini's loss is Ontario's gain. From there, you had a very successful career as a small businessman before entering politics. So I'd like to ask you, too, how does your experience in the business world influence the way you're leading the Green Party of Ontario?
Yeah, Tim, I started one of Ontario's first local organic food businesses just right outside of Guelph here. I started another food production business here in Guelph, and I've actually started up some nonprofit organizations promoting local food and farmers. And so you could say that I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur, and I oftentimes like to make the impossible possible. And, you know, I really feel that way with the Green Party. I mean, can't tell you how many people said to me, you know, Mike, I really admire what you're trying to do with the Green Party, but you're never going to get elected. So why are you wasting your time? And so it was nice to prove them wrong. And I think that's any entrepreneur's dream, is to have a vision and make it happen, even when people say you can't do it. And the Green Party really speaks to my values And what I've tried to do now is really treat building the party as an entrepreneur would approach building a business.
Well, I got to give you top grades for perseverance as well. I remember when we were both leaders at the same time, waiting to be scrummed by the media after question period. You were regularly there in the gallery watching a debate, and you then succeeded. You became the first Green Party member in Ontario, the leader of the Ontario Green Party. You are doing a great job representing the riding of Guelph. That's all great to see. And you've been a strong voice in the legislature on a number of issues. Let me ask you first, and I want to get to the pandemic in a second. Just a few days ago, last Thursday, the Ford government brought forward their budget for the province. What's the take of the leader of the Ontario Green Party?
I'm going to give you 3 takes on it, Tim. The first one is there's just some holes in the budget that really concern me. And the biggest one is an unfunded promise to bring in 4 hours of care for our elders in long-term care. I mean, the tragedy we saw this spring in our long-term care system is something we can't allow to happen again. I've been advocating for minimum standards of care, 4 hours. I was happy to see the Premier come on board last week and say that's a commitment. But the fact that it's unfunded in the budget really concerns me. Secondly, I'm going to do something most opposition parties don't do. I'm going to actually give the government a compliment. One of the things I've been arguing for a long time is a permanent increase in the employer health tax exemption to $1 million. A great way to help small businesses, particularly with their cash flow. I thought it made sense pre-pandemic. It especially makes sense given the current situation we're in and how many small businesses are struggling. And it was nice to see that policy finally pass, be in a budget, and made permanent. I think it's going to make a big difference for small businesses. Now I'm going to go back to criticizing and say that another big disappointment for me in the budget was there really isn't a vision for what economic recovery is going to look like. And I'll be the first to tell you we have to prioritize public health. What's good for public health is good for the economy. But you know what? We're gonna emerge from this, Tim, and we have to have a plan in place for recovery. I've been arguing for a green and caring recovery. I think Ontario is perfectly positioned to be a global leader in electric vehicle mining and manufacturing, for example. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about my green renovation plan, but there's some real opportunities for Ontario to be a leader in emerging markets, and I did not see that anywhere in the budget.
I'm going to get to your green renovation plan. We think it's great. I'll talk about that in a moment. As we talk about the budget, and you mentioned a few things about what's happening around long-term care and other challenges with respect to COVID. And I bet when you signed up for the job as an MPP for Guelph and the Green leader, you didn't expect a pandemic on the horizon. If you look big picture, Mr. Leader, what would you say the government's doing well, and where could they improve when it comes to managing through COVID?
You know what? I'll give the government, and I actually give every political party in Ontario credit. In the early days of the pandemic, I think all of us set partisanship aside and really said, you know what, how can we work together to, help the people of Ontario? And, Tim, I don't think it was anyone could imagine how many bills were passed by unanimous consent in like an hour, which is just unheard of and unprecedented in Queen's Park, as you would know. And I think during those days, the Premier did a good job of communicating the seriousness of the issue, following public health advice, and really empathizing with the people of Ontario. And you know what? He deserves credit for that. And so, you know what? I think we all owe him thanks for the way he helped get us through the first part of the pandemic. My biggest disappointment has been what I feel has been the lack of preparation in preparing for the second wave. Over the summer, I thought we wasted an opportunity to really invest in getting our testing and contact tracing up to the level it needs to be. If you look at the countries that have successfully reopened their economies and kept the virus under control, testing and contact tracing has been key to that. And I don't want to see any more lockdowns or even modified restrictions. But the fact that we haven't had the testing capacity and contact tracing capacity in place has meant that the virus has gotten a bit more out of control in the second wave than I think it needed to be. My second one comes back to long-term care. BC and Quebec over the summer, they were hiring the staff to have our long-term care facilities ready for the second wave. Ontario did not do that. I've been pushing the government on this, ever since we came back in September. And the minister, rightfully so, has replied to my question saying, well, we can't just snap our fingers and hire additional staff. And I'm like, that's my point. Why weren't we hiring them back in the summer? Because now Ontario is scrambling to try to hire the staff we need to have in long-term care. And then my final one, Tim, is that, I think we really should have followed the advice of Sick Kids when they said lower class sizes will minimize spread in schools, which then can flow out into the community by having reduced class sizes. I think if those would have been in place, we wouldn't be seeing the case counts numbers that we're seeing now, and we could have avoided some of those modified stage 2 lockdowns that a lot of small businesses in Toronto and Peel and Ottawa have been having to deal with.
As I mentioned, Mike, it was great to work with you as a colleague, as a party leader in the province, and I want to say that we've all been very impressed by your strong support around housing and home ownership issues, and you've been a real champion of raising the bar for professional standards. You spoke in the legislation and question period around higher professional standards. You're a big supporter of personal real estate corporations, and you also brought some very good amendments forward to the TRESA, the Trust and Real Estate Services Act. And I know you're someone who believes in the value of home ownership as well. So what would you do as a Green Party leader to make homeownership more affordable for more Canadians? And then after that, I'll ask you about the renovation tax credit.
Hey, Tim, before I answer that question, I just want to go back to the whole committee process around TRESA and say that, sometimes you experience something that really is the best of what can happen in a legislature. And you know what? I can go through the partisan, ship as well with anyone. And you've seen me today criticize the government when I think they should be criticized and compliment them when they should be. But I would say that, all parties voted for that legislation. And when I brought forward amendments and an NDP critic brought forward amendments, the government worked with us and made some adjustments to the legislation so that we could have all party support. And, in some ways, that's the best of how I think Queen's Park should work, how our legislature should work. And, if you want to think about where I was born, it doesn't work that well down there as much. So it just, to me, was, that's an example of what's the best of Ontario politics. And then around home ownership, I'm really excited about the discussion paper the Green Party has launched. We're getting a lot of positive reviews from everyone from home builders and realtors to affordable housing advocates, municipal politicians, a lot of people in between. And it's really about, how do we come up with a vision to make sure everybody in Ontario has an affordable place they can call home. And it's looking at the whole continuum. So we want to make sure that, seniors who want to downsize can afford to downsize. Young families who want to upsize can afford to upsize. People who are struggling with mental health and addictions issues can have supportive housing with wraparound services. And it's really about increasing the supply of housing and a mixed choice of additional supply without paving over our farmland and opening the Greenbelt for development and all of that. And we can do it. We have the land capacity to do it. We have the home builders who can do it. We have the real estate agents who can help people find the place that's most appropriate for them. And it's really everything from, single family detached houses, townhomes, tiny homes, laneway suites. It's a whole way of providing a mixed range of choices that are most appropriate for people and ensuring that we have the right kind of investments from government and the public sector, but also making sure we're partnering and leveraging the private sector to deliver home ownership and for those folks who want access to more affordable rentals as well.
Yeah, we're very impressed when you brought your plan to our government relations committee of realtor leaders. If people watching at home, Mike, want to get a copy of the Green Party's plan around housing, where could they find that?
If you go to gpo.ca, our website, there's a link there where you can access the housing plan. And I would encourage all of your members to read it and provide us feedback. I know the feedback that your government relations committee has provided has been very valuable, and we'll be turning that discussion paper obviously into a platform for the next election because, I think this pandemic has really shown how important affordable housing is. And we were in a bit of a housing crisis before the pandemic. I think this has only highlighted it. And we need your members' input into making sure we bring forward the best housing strategy Ontario's ever had.
A big part of your housing strategy involved a province-wide retrofit program. In fact, Mr. Leader, you brought forward a motion in the House to do just that, help people reduce their carbon footprint. They can save money on their energy bills, and in so doing, create jobs. So in your view, what would that mean to a typical family in Guelph or any part of our province?
Yeah, it means basically having a renovation tax credit and renovation grants available to homeowners, small businesses, and tenants to be able to save money by saving energy and increasing the value of their home. I think one of the things we saw in the 2008 recession, one of the most successful recovery programs was the renovation tax credit programs that were brought in by both the federal and provincial governments. And so it's building on that. We had so many people come to committee over the summer. I was on the province's Economic Recovery Committee. One of the number one asks was a renovation tax credit. And we think it makes absolute sense to help homeowners, businesses improve the energy performance of their buildings, because we know utility bills and electricity costs are top of mind for people. So let's give them opportunities to reduce those costs. We know it improves the value of their home or their buildings, helps businesses be more competitive on energy costs. And the best thing in terms of economic recovery is creates thousands of jobs. And these are jobs that you can't ship off to China or Mexico or some other low-wage jurisdiction. And so to me, it's a win for the environment, reducing climate pollution. It's a win for homeowners and small businesses. And it's a win for Ontario's economy.
Well, I hope you're not mad at us, because we borrowed your idea and put it in our own suggestions for the budget around the retrofit program. We think it's great. We're happy to see the one around the seniors tax credit too, for retrofitting for seniors to age in place. And I remember that program back in 2008, 2009 for the renovation tax credit. It was very successful. So we like your idea, although it did cause a lot of marital strife when you had to decide between one project. A lot of families.
That is true. We went through a bit of that in my family, and my wife will probably be upset if I say this, but she said, we put the most expensive underwear our house could ever have because we spent so much money on insulation. But every time our monthly utility bill is down compared to what it used to be, I tell my wife, that was an investment well worth making.
There you go. Mike Schreiner, this has been an enormous pleasure. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us here today. And I do hope it'd be good to come back to Guelph and grab lunch or maybe a beer with you at the Woolly when things get back to normal.
Sounds good, Tim. My constituency office is literally right across the street from the Woolly. So happy to go out on their back patio with you and talk about housing.
Take you up on that. Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
All right, coming up next, OREA has hosted 3 former world leaders, 2 prime ministers and a president at its conference the last few years. And after the break, we're going to welcome our 4th. Next, I will sit down with Canada's 18th prime minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, to talk politics, the U.S. elections, home ownership, and family. Right back after this.
It started as a street address. Bedrooms, half baths, square feet. But over time, this place is where you came into your own. You learned how to cook, how to adult, and then you outgrew it. When you moved here, you fell in love with the city and something more. In this home, you made a life together. You became pet parents, and then real parents. And then life happened again. You moved up, or broke up, or moved back. Our homes change our lives and hold entire chapters of our stories. And each time we move, we grow. At Zillow, we know how powerful moving can be because we get to help millions of people move their story forward. But moving is really hard, and that's why we're transforming the way people move. No longer just a tool for dreaming about houses. We are an inspiring and supportive partner to give people the power to unlock life's next chapter.
He was the 18th Prime Minister of Canada, winning back-to-back majority governments in 1984 and 1988. In fact, in 1984, the PCs under his leadership won 211 of the available 282 seats. That was the largest seat total in Canadian history. He led Canada through the end of the Cold War. He worked to unite our country, and he signed an historic trade deal with the United States. On the world stage, Prime Minister Mulroney also stood up for human rights and against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney is a legend of Canadian politics. And here to introduce the Prime Minister is our episode sponsor from Zillow, Joel Shears, Director of Industry Relations.
Hi, my name is Joel Shears, and I'm the Director of Industry Relations for Zillow Group. Zillow is excited to support ORIA's Ontario Realtor Party Conference again this year. It's been an exciting year for Zillow in Canada, with lots of growth and investment. And as many of you know, our model is changing. However, our focus on supporting local brokers and agents to connect them with home shoppers is as strong as ever. And as we progress Zillow 2.0, our team will be available to provide updates across the province virtually, and hopefully soon we can all be together. And now it's my honor to introduce Canada's 18th Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney.
Well, thank you, Joel. And good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning to you, Tim. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, it's great to see you again. It's a true honor to have you on our show today. And I want to thank you personally for the advice and support you gave me during my time in the business. Before, Prime Minister, we dive into some of the issues of today, we want to ask you, how are Mila and the family doing?
Well, they're doing great, Tim. Everything's fine. The kids are all in Toronto, and Mila and I are in the house here. And I mentioned to you earlier that I finally figured out this problem of COVID-19, because that involves a lot of togetherness for a couple, as we all know. And so I finally figured it out. I divided the house in two. Mila gets half, I get the other half, and our dog, Hugo, acts as the mediator. So we're doing that. But before we move on, I want to pass on to you, if our audience allows me, my compliments to that wonderful wife of yours, Debbie, who made the Harris government, the trains run on time. She was fantastic. And I always thought, Tim, that you were one of the most courageous young leaders in Ontario. You took principled stands and you defended them well. And so I congratulate you. It's politics ain't easy, as we all know, but you did it extremely well.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister. It means
Thank
a lot
you for having me.
That means a lot to me personally, and to Deb. That's very kind of you to say. Well, let's talk about family. I mean, I'm just curious if you and Mila had the same conversations Debbie and I do. I mean, parents sometimes encourage their kids to follow their footsteps, and sometimes they encourage them to go into a different profession altogether. And as you just said, politics is a pretty tough business. We're just curious, like, did you encourage your children to get into public life, or did you recommend they get into other careers?
Not at all. I was surprised, although pleasantly so, when Caroline decided to make a run at it. But I always thought as well that of the four, the three boys and Caroline, that she was the most politically attuned and astute as well. And so while I was surprised when she decided to do it, I was confident that she could do it well. With regard to the others, Tim, I just made the usual comments. Go wherever you want to go. Whatever you do, do it well. But you're under no obligation to do anything other than what you want. What I want for you is what you should want for yourself. Happiness. Have a good life, a happy life, and be happy in your employment, in your job. And so they're doing that pretty well. And I'm very, at my age, you look down the vista of the years, as they say, and I'm happy with the way it all turned out.
It's great advice to all of us as parents. Let me just ask you another one about Caroline then, because she's been, really good to us. She's the Minister of Transportation, of course. She's been very pro-home ownership, pro-realtor, Minister for Francophone Affairs as well in the Ford government. We talked about my wife, Debbie, earlier on. Debbie helped her on her leadership campaign. So you mentioned how you reacted when she decided to get into politics. Did you see something at an early age? Like, were there some early traits you saw in her that you thought might cause her to make the leap into public life?
Yes, I did. She was a very careful observer of politics. Not a great partisan initially, and she went to Harvard, and she became president of the political union down there. And Teddy Kennedy told me years ago, he said, Brian, I've met with Caroline a number of times at Harvard at the Kennedy Institute. And he said, I'm going to predict for you that she's going to go a long way in politics. And I said, well, Teddy, I don't think she's that interested. She was. And it's turned out well. Teddy was right again.
It's a great story. Well, as I said, she's been fantastic. Really there at the center of the storm with this pandemic happening in Ontario as one of the senior leaders around the Jobs and Recovery Committee of Cabinet. Prime Minister, let's move on to you, your career, and I'm going to ask a few questions about looking ahead. But I think you would agree that even your greatest critics would acknowledge that Brian Mulroney never shied away from a tough call. Whether they liked what you did or not, they would all agree you were always decisive, that you tackled difficult and long-standing issues, you never backed away. What do you see on reflection when you look at today's climate of some of those long-standing and difficult issues that leaders are afraid to take on today, and what would you do about them?
Well, I tried to adopt the position, and you're never completely successful, obviously, but I tried to adopt the position with my caucus and cabinet and the House of Commons, was that we are going to do this only if it's good for Canada. If it's not good for Canada, we're not going to do it. But we're not going to do it for reasons of popularity. Big ideas often have provoked tremendous resistance, and that's always a difficult one. But I thought that you had to do things not for easy headlines in 10 days, but for a better Canada in 10 years. And that's why I forced matters through on free trade and NAFTA and the GST and things like that were not popular. And I knew they were not going to be popular. But I hoped anyway that 25 years later, as we look back on them, they'll say, well, we didn't like them at the time, but we have to admit that Mulroney did the right thing in this regard. And I think that's the way you have to look at it. If you want popularity, and we've had prime ministers, that's all they wanted was instant popularity. The problem with that is that when you look back 25 years, the record will show that you've done nothing of substance. You've left no major footprints in the history of our country. And I wanted to avoid that. And with the unpopularity I sustained, I did, but I didn't worry about that. I didn't worry about that at all. It was just the price of poker that I had to pay to get from point A to point B. And from Mandela to liberation of Mandela to the GST to the Acid Rain Treaty to the creation of the Sommet de la Francophonie, all of these, the first Gulf War, the relationship, I got a lot of criticism for my early relationship with President Reagan from the left-wingers in Canada and in Toronto too. He said I was selling out Canada and all of this nonsense. And they said that in the 1988 free trade election. None of it turned out to be true. But I'll tell you, it was a bruising attack on me, nonstop every day. But I think in the long run, it's like running a business, running your businesses, your members who have done so much to contribute to Ontario. When they get up in the morning, they go to their office. It's not always peaches and cream. And they've got to make tough decisions, which they have, that has benefited on Ontario and Canada in such a major way. So that was just my view. Other people have their own views, but I'm happy with the way it's turning out.
Prime Minister, I know you do this. My question would be if you were sitting next to Prime Minister Trudeau today, but I know it doesn't matter the party. You're one who give advice to our leaders of all parties on the big issues. You mentioned some of the big issues of the 80s and 90s. What do you see as the commanding issues here in 2020 that too many leaders seem hesitant to take on?
Well, I think major infrastructure projects are there. The North, the fabulous opportunities that exist there and will govern the nature of Canada 75 years from now. I think that we need a doubling of our population to 75 million people over time. And we've got to maintain firm policies to do that. But, you know, look what happens with our immigrant communities. For example, we just take the Italians in Toronto who immigrated in such great number. You know, when the president of Italy came and I had a state dinner for him in Toronto, big dinner. And I said, Mr. President, I hope you noticed the development here in Toronto, because I can tell you that the first generation of Italians who immigrated to Canada in Toronto built those buildings that you see. And the second generation owns them. and I've never seen a wave of immigration in Canadian history from all backs, people of color, people of different religions, people of this, that, who have not made a major contribution to the economic well-being and the social well-being of Canada. Immigration, and this is what segregates us or separates us as well from different countries and their policies. Immigration is a big deal. Trade, somebody's got to try and lead again and create, and Canada's well positioned to do that. We've got a free trade agreement with the United States, and we've got NAFTA with the United States and Mexico, and I was privileged to lead on those. And then I joined the Organization of American States. We didn't have a clue what was going in our own hemisphere. And I was told that previous prime ministers didn't want to associate with because the Americans played a much greater role, of course, in the Organization of American States. And they thought the Americans influenced it too much, and so they didn't want to go. I said, well, in that case, then we should resign from the G7. We should resign from NATO. And we should resign from the United Nations, because the Americans have such a powerful influence everywhere. So I want Canada to develop in Latin America as well. And you consider this. We could have a free trade agreement of the Americas with Canada in the driver's seat with the Americans and Mexico. We create the free trade area of the Americas with 35 nations, almost 1 billion people, with a trading possibility of economies generating in excess of $30 trillion a year. Can you look at how well we've done with Canada-US free trade and then with NAFTA? Can you imagine this new trading bloc, the greatest in the history of the world, what this will do for Canada in jobs and productivity and employment and investment opportunities back and forth? And someday I think that's going to take hold. And Canada will be in a leadership position there. And it's going to generate enormous wealth. Take NAFTA. And that's been criticized a lot recently by President Trump, because he says that Canada and Mexico had the better of them in the negotiations. Well, set that aside for a minute. But what we started with, President Reagan and I started at Quebec City in March of 1985, the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, which became the greatest bilateral trading relationship in the history of the world. So the benefit for Canada was extraordinary. But here, these three that we put together in San Antonio, Texas, Bush and Salinas and myself in 1992, that has now evolved into 3 trading nations, friends, allies, Mexico, the United States, and Canada, which with 7% of the world's population generates 29% of the wealth and the GDP of the entire world. Now, 50 million jobs have been created just for the United States in that period of time, and tens of millions in Canada and Mexico. That's what we can go. That's what people should be thinking about. The future of Canada. We've built the foundation. But the Old Testament said that young men have visions and old men dream dreams. Well, a great nation like Canada needs a combination of both. And politicians now, prime ministers and leaders, have to become visionary. If we did this, what will it do for Canada in 25 years? It's the same old principle I was talking about. Well, just try and imagine. Look at NAFTA, look at Canada-US. Imagine what we can do with this new trading arrangement. I think it would be fabulous, but you need visionary leadership to get there. And I think Canadians are capable of that.
Prime Minister, those comments about visions and dreams and those themes of a stronger Canada and an influential Canada on the world stage ran through a recent op-ed that I enjoyed reading from you in the Globe and Mail back in June. Like your comments now, it was forward-looking, it was optimistic, and those are qualities that we could all use a lot more of these days. You referenced in there, Prime Minister, I was going to ask a couple things that really caught my eye. You talked about how the Prime Minister of Canada should consider implementing what was called the Agenda for Canadian Greatness. That included a full Indigenous justice system by implementation of the Erasmus Dussault Royal Commission report and greater fairness and opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Laudable goals.
Anti-Semitism.
And exactly, standing against anti-Semitism. And to make that, enhance those qualities in Canada, what do you see as the first steps in getting there?
Well, Bill Clinton used to say that leadership is the capacity to look around the corner of history just a little bit. And so this has to start with, for example, a resource-based country like ours, and it's not going anywhere for a long time. We have, billions and billions of barrels of oil under the soil in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but that's going nowhere unless we deal with the first point that I made. We have got to find a way to bring peace and finality to the constitutional questions which cause such disruptions when the Indigenous peoples are fed up with not getting their fair share for Canada, and they put up all of these obstacles. They have protests, and they stop the trains and the tracks and so on. This has to be dealt with. And look, Canada's 150, going on 154 years of age, and we still have this blight on our citizenship. We still have this. The Aboriginals have not been treated with fairness by all governments of Canada. And so somebody has to say, look, first we're going to provide the Indigenous peoples with justice. We're going to give them economic opportunity, and we're going to eradicate as best we can anti-Semitism and racism and so on. And then we're going to free up the infrastructure development of Canada. Our products are going to go to Tidewater everywhere, and we're going to be back in the business of creating job and new wealth. Trillions of dollars of new wealth is possible once people won't invest in countries if they see disruptions. They're very reluctant to. We just had a cancellation in Quebec of a $1 billion project, when for its development, Warren Buffett withdrew $6 billion of committed capital to help this major pipeline and grow because of the political opposition. Demonstrations in the streets. They pulled the plug on $6 billion worth of investment. We have to stop that. And then we have to have a program to increase our productivity. We have among the worst productivity in the world. We're out of 24 countries in the OECD, we're number 22. Our productivity is lower than that of the state of Mississippi. Not saying a whole hell of a lot for us. So there is a tremendous opportunity for a Prime Minister of Canada to say, look, I may be wrong, but because I'm the Prime Minister, I plan to do it. This is in Canadian interest. And here is an agenda for Canadian success and achievement. And I'm going to start this way, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. The fact of the matter is, as you know very much, Tim, if the Prime Minister in our system doesn't grab a hold of it and say, this is what we're going to do. You can't go around asking everybody for their opinion forever. And the leadership is the issue in Ottawa. And I'm not disparaging anybody by saying that. It is. Nothing of substance is going to happen in Canada without the approval and the leadership of the Prime Minister of Canada. So this function of leadership, I always thought that there were two parts to leadership. There was substance and there was style. And for example, if we take the United States election, I think that President Trump had a lot to commend him on substance. He did a lot of great things. He moved his country forward in important areas. And he, most recently, the peace agreement in the Middle East with Israel and some of their neighbors. And there are more coming, I understand. So he had this tax bill, his trade arrangements in some important areas. In substance, President Trump did a lot. Where he came a cropper was in the second element, style. You can't lead a country very long if you're attacking your allies. I mean, he attacked Canada, for example, on a regular basis, where he played kissy face with the dictators in North Korea and Russia and China. He was a lot closer to them than to America's traditional allies. When you see what he said about Theresa May, about Angela Merkel, about President Macron in France, these are our friends and allies. We've been friends with them for 200 years. And yet he had that temptation constantly to shoot at his allies. And I think that in the end, his attitude, his persona, God alone, has done him in. Because you can admire the policy, but if the style offends you, you ain't going to vote for him. And that's why, in spite of everything, you can be a tough leader and a good leader, but you have to, as my mother would say, you have to mind your manners, and with your friends and allies and enemies. So I think that's kind of what happened down there, and it's the kind of thing that I must say that Prime Minister Trudeau is very good at avoiding. He has. I won't comment on the substance, but on the style of politics, he's very good.
So, Prime Minister, let's talk national unity. Then I want to come back a bit about your comments on the U.S. election and what it means for Canada. But certainly national unity, you made extraordinary efforts to unite our country, and we've seen a lot of ups and downs in the years since you were in office, focusing on bringing Quebec within Confederation fully. You challenged separatism. You stood up for a strong Canada united across all 10 provinces and territories. But we're experiencing a new form of it now in challenges of the Western provinces, in particular feelings of alienation in Alberta, Saskatchewan, even Manitoba from other parts of the country. So in your opinion, Prime Minister, what's the state of federalism in Canada, and are you worried about challenges to national unity?
Tim, a Prime Minister of Canada has two vital files on his desk at all times. First is national unity, and second is the Canada-US relationship. Those are the big ones, and only he can resolve them and deal with them, because only he can speak for the entire country. Now, we have a crisis coming up with regard to Western Canada, and it has to be dealt with. And it can only be dealt with in the same way as we've been talking about. Leadership from Ottawa, leadership from the Prime Minister. He has got to make certain that these economic developments are allowed to continue. That brings prosperity to the West, which they generously share with all the rest of us and have for decades under the equalization formula. So we owe it to Alberta and Saskatchewan and to BC. We owe it to the Western Canada to acknowledge the difficulties that they're in and say with meaning, I, as the Prime Minister, I'm going to make sure that the Canadian government responds to this favorably in a way that will attract interest and attract results. And there are ways of doing it, but in all cases, it involves the Prime Minister calling in, say, the leaders of the Western provinces and say, look, I know we got a problem. I know you have a major problem out there, but we're going to fix it together. This obstruction that exists with regard to energy movement across Canada, east and west, you sit down and you say, all right, here's my idea. This is a major problem, and we got to solve it. The environmentalists are going to get this. The provinces are going to get this. The government of Canada is going to get this. And we will find renewed prosperity in the trillions of dollars that we can all share as Canadian citizens. But I am not going to allow this impasse to remain, where everybody is frustrated and angry, and we've got this fortune locked under the Alberta soil, which we could be sharing with everybody across the country. So I want you to go home and now think about what I said, my plan, Canadian leadership for this matter, and come back and see me in a week. We'll have lunch or dinner, and we're going to talk about this, and we're going to solve it. So they come back and they say, well, we can agree with this, but we can't agree with that, and so on. And finally, you put together a package. They say, this is going to take place, and I will make whatever arrangements have to be made by the government of Canada to ensure that this works and that the prosperity, the ensuing prosperity, is favorably and generously shared across Canada. And then, of course, you get to the point where everybody or some party agrees and others don't. You say, well, this is so important that I'm going to pull the plug on this, and I'm going to let the people decide. And you just watch and see how fast they get back into line. Because no one has the right to obstruct the development in Western Canada the way it's going on now.
Prime Minister, you mentioned the two big files. You just talked about national unity and your guidance for the time ahead. The other was the U.S.-Canada relationship. So what's your take on the U.S. election? And in your view, what is that going to mean for us here in the country of Canada?
Well, a lot of people will be happy to see Trump gone. But the fact of the matter is that over history, you'll find that Canadians always love the Democratic president or challenger. Obama could win an election in Canada with 95% of the vote, kind of thing. But most of the progress that's been made over the years from the St. Lawrence Seaway, under President Eisenhower, to free trade under President Reagan, to the environment under President Bush, most of the progress is made under Republican presidents. And so they expected Joe Biden to do wonders. And he's a very kind, I've known him for forever, and he's a very kind and thoughtful gentleman. But he's in the Democratic Party, which has become more and more protectionist. And it's beholden to the big labor unions down there. And now they've got these progressives who are really extreme left-wingers, from Bernie Sanders down. And so he's going to be in handcuffs on a lot of the policies as they affect Canada. So we're going to have to be very vigilant, although we'll have a very pleasant relationship under President Biden. We're going to have to be very vigilant to protect our interests. And that, as you know, in the United States is not always easy. Justin Trudeau had a more difficult role than I did, because I worked with President Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, the three of them. They're perfect gentlemen. They liked Canada a lot. They admired Canada's sacrifice over the decades. They were pleased to be our immediate neighbor, and it showed the way they treated us, and the progress that we made on free trade, on the environment, on Arctic sovereignty. I mean, there was an acid rain kind of thing. We got a lot done because of that, and they were very pleasant. Trump interrupted that because he's an America firster. Well, America firsters mean America alone and prosperity for America, and we don't give a hell about the rest of them. That's what America first means. Protectionism and economic and security matters dealt with to protect the United States of America. Fair ball. But that's not a very pleasant position to be in. And Mr. Trudeau didn't have the Reagans and the Bushes and the Clintons like I did. He had our friend Donald, who was, he's a wonderful guy. He's got some great talents, and he left a large legacy. But on a day-to-day basis, he didn't make it easy for Mr. Trudeau. And so I think that Biden will make it easy for Mr. Trudeau. I think they're going to have a great relationship, and I think progress is going to be made. But it remains to be seen whether he is not completely handicapped in this by his own backyard, the players in his own backyard, in his party. But if he can get over that, Canada and the United States can do great things again.
You mentioned the three presidents that you work with, Prime Minister Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton. In fact, Debbie and I and the girls went to the Reagan Presidential Library last year in California. And made us very proud to see our Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, at the time on the stage. You spoke of the eulogies for both Presidents Reagan and Bush. When you think about the three U.S. presidents you worked with, the success, Acid Rain Deal, the NAFTA, Arctic sovereignty, the Shamrock Summit, these are historic moments in our nation. So how does a prime minister then, with different personalities, and you mentioned President Trump and his approach, I mean, how does it work to establish that personal relationship with the President of the United States? And do you have any advice then for Prime Minister Trudeau, all looks like working with President Biden?
Well, there's no relationship more important for the Prime Minister of Canada than a relationship, a very favorable working relationship with the President of the United States. This could only be done by, we have a great ambassador down there, and Chrystia Freeland was a great Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister and so on, but this has to be done by the President. And you have to realize who he is and what he's up to and so on. And Canada has to reassert its role as a privileged friend and ally of the United States of America. If you don't have the President of the United States on side in your corner, nothing's going to happen between the parties bilaterally. Because I was able, because of our friendship with President Reagan and Bush and Clinton, I was able not only to have we were able to have a fabulous relationship with the President and with the administration officials and with Congress, both sides. I mean, hell, I was with Teddy Kennedy one day and Mitch McConnell the next. But you have to have that because that's their system. You can't sit there, and the media plays a major role down there, as we all know. And the interest groups, the major interest groups, you have to take that all into your thinking and devise a strategy, which I tried to do, that had certain objectives, clear-cut objectives in mind. And when controversy arose, and it did arise, and I was down there, and we were in the cabinet chamber, and the bureaucracy is always pushing back against, for example, anything coming from Canada or what have you. But I'll tell you, unless you've seen the President of the United States say to his cabinet and his senior officials, I want this deal with Canada to go through. Whoops. All of a sudden, the objections evaporate. Because when he says that, they're looking at themselves and saying, I want to be a success in this administration. I want to go up too. I better not do anything to one day. It's been published. This all stuff is all public, books and letters and so on. Ty Cobb was the senior national security advisor to the President of the United States for Canada and Western Europe. Very influential person. And they were having a meeting down there in advance of my state visit. They were having a meeting, and they wanted to push back on me and on Canada So there was a meeting that took place. George Shultz, Cap Weinberger, the president, and Ty Cobb. And Cobb writes in this book, he said, I was getting a little tired of Mulroney, horsing around with us all the time. And so I wrote a pretty stiff memorandum about Canada coming down here and Mulroney arriving. And so I wrote a pretty stiff memorandum, and I left it for the president. So the president comes into the cabinet chamber with the 3 or 4 of us are there, carrying his bowl of beans, which he always ate during cabinet meetings. And he walks in, and he said that he has the memorandum like this in his hand. And he walks in with the jelly beans, and he said he usually walked in with a big smile on his face and say, what do you got for me today, boys? This time he walked in, and he threw it right on the table in my direction, and he said, I do not speak to Brian Mulroney like that. So he said, while I was contemplating whether I would be fired on the spot or just exiled to Fort Chimo, he said, Reagan said, he said, oh God, the things you do. Reagan sat down, and all the rest were saying, well, all right, Mr. President, we agree with you. Canada is a priority. And, it sounds a little bizarre maybe, but that's the way human nature is. We're all different. We all have different personalities. So the key is to lock in a relationship between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada that is better than any other leader in the world. That's what the objective is.
Look, that's a great reinforcement of what the realtor audience is all about, right? Building those lasting and trusting relationships. That's the main thing to do. All right, we've had a great conversation about some of the big issues you faced, the importance of vision, the importance of having both leadership style and substance. I want to bear down a little bit on decision-making. I mean, ultimately, leadership is a lonely business. You can be surrounded by crowds. You can have all kinds of advisors, meet with whoever you want, whenever you want. But then you've got to make the call on your own. So, Prime Minister, as you look over all the major challenging issues you had to face, our country faced, from free trade, taxation, national unity, the list goes on forever. What was the toughest call you had to make?
Well, there were tough calls with regard, for example, to Meech Lake, which was signed and sealed and delivered by all 10 provincial premiers, including Clyde Wells, who signed the document, Meech Lake. And he asked me to come down and speak to the legislature, which I did the night before the vote. Vote was scheduled. And he invited me to his home for dinner, which I did. And he's got a lovely wife, and we had a nice chat and so on. And as we're going out the door in the rain, I'm heading back to Ottawa. The vote's taking place the next morning at 11. And I said, Clyde, well, what do you think now about it? Well, he said, I was opposed to this, and given to your speech today to the legislature, and I'm told that it went very well. And I would say it's maybe a 5 on 10. That's exactly what he told me. I'm pretty happy because I get in the plane for the long flight home from Newfoundland. It's about midnight when we left. And I knew the results of the latest poll that night, that since I had spoken, we had gained 11 points. And the Newfoundlanders were happy with the deal. And the next morning, I'm in Ottawa, 24 Sussex, the phone rings. Premier Wells has canceled the deal. He sabotaged the vote. And for the first time in the history of a Democratic Parliament, the elected members were not allowed to vote on a major constitutional change. He canceled it. And he did this because he was under pressure from Mr. Trudeau, the senior, and Mr. Chrétien and others. And so it was sabotaged. And there were decisions made at that time that were very sad, very, very, this was, look, it had been agreed upon by the 10 premiers, by the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, John Turner at the time, Ed Broadbent. There was wide agreement in the country because you couldn't have forever a constitution that had a hole in its heart, namely the absence of Quebec, one of our founding peoples, the French-speaking element to what makes Canada so different and so great. And there it was, and gone down. That was a major decision. The second one, a package of decisions that I had to make leading up to that and after. And another vital one was when in the free trade negotiations, we had fast track authority from the American Congress until the 3rd of October, I think it was. Yeah. In other words, the deal was negotiated. Once it was signed, it had to go back to Congress, but Congress couldn't cherry pick. A guy from Wyoming couldn't say, I want this in agriculture. You signed it, a whole ball of wax went in. And so I was afraid we were going to lose that. Reagan had appointed a very nice guy, Peter Murphy, who's now deceased, but he had no political clout whatsoever. He was a bureaucrat, a good bureaucrat, but he was a bureaucrat. And this thing was coming to an end. So I called, we weren't getting attention. We weren't getting the priority treatment that we should. And so I instructed the Canadian delegation in Washington, led by Simon Reisman and Derek Burney, tell Simon to come home right now. I'm pulling the plug on this thing. And the whole place went crazy because this is such a huge deal. And so Reagan called me the next day and he said, Brian, what the hell's going on here? I said, well, that's my question for you, Ron. We're not getting the attention. This thing's not moving. And we're running a runway here. And he said, what do you think I should do? I said, you got to appoint somebody like Jimmy Baker to look after your interests. He's the best. I can tell you, without Baker, there'd have been no free trade deal. So Baker called me in the Launchpad building at about 10 o'clock or 9:30 or 10 o'clock, the night that it was to expire. And he said, Prime Minister, look, you got a hell of a deal here, but there's one thing that we can't do for you. I said, what's that? And he said, the independent dispute settlement mechanism. I said, Jimmy, I've made that a condition sine qua non. I'm not going to sign a deal that doesn't have an independent dispute mechanism because we can't win with the judiciary and the boards of control that exist in the American Congress. We need, if we have major dispute on behalf of Canada, we've got to have a Canadian, an American, and an independent guy so that we don't get screwed all the way to the bank here. And I've told you, this is a big deal for us. We can't do it without it. And he said, well, I'm sorry. The congressional people who are here, the leaders of Congress who are here, tell me that this would be a dilution of our constitutional authority in areas of international trade. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I said, well, all right, Jim, but let me tell you. It's Saturday night. It's 10:30 or whatever it was. Yeah, 10 or 10:30. And I said, I'm going to call President Reagan at Camp David. And so immediately Baker says, well, what are you going to tell him? I said, Jim, I'm simply going to ask him a question. How can it be that the United States of America can sign a nuclear reduction treaty with its worst enemies, the Soviet Union, and they can't sign a free trade agreement with their best friends and allies, Canada? Baker says, Prime Minister, can you give me 20 minutes? I said, sure. Now what I'm about to tell you, I was not there. This comes from Derek Burney and Simon Reisman and Pat Carney and the others. Michael Wilson, the great Michael Wilson. They tell me that 10 minutes later, Baker walks into the boardroom where the Canadians were in the Treasury Department in Washington. He walks in and he throws a piece of paper, handwritten piece of paper on the table, and he says, there's your goddamned independent dispute mechanism. Now, can we bloody well get this up to Congress before midnight, before it expires? So that's exactly what happened. And so that was a decision, to call them back from a huge international negotiation, and then to put that on the table with Baker, because Baker could have said, well, I don't care if you call the president, do what you want. But he knew damn well what Reagan was going to say. And he knew my relationship with Reagan, and that I wouldn't call him on a Saturday night unless it was vital. And I knew as well that Reagan years ago had made a speech about the free trade from Alaska to the tip of South America. And of course, I knew what he thought of Canada and so on. So that was another. I mean, it sounds kind of entertaining in the telling, but let me tell you, it was no piece of cake. This was no walk in the park, believe me.
I just love those anecdotes, what happened behind the scenes. So Prime Minister, those are great examples of Meech Lake, the free trade negotiations, big parts now of Canadian history. I'm going to ask you the different side of this question. So those are in history books for sure. There are probably some other accomplishments that you made, that you accomplished, that didn't get the credit that they deserve. What comes to mind when you think of something that you did in government that didn't get that kind of credit?
The African famine. Right off the bat, Brian Stewart of the CBC, who was in there in Africa, the only four journalists down there from Canada, and he said the leadership that Prime Minister Mulroney and his government showed saved 7 million lives in Ethiopia. And they were big decisions for a new government, for a brand new government. I mean, I didn't know my way to the washroom at the time, but right away, instinctively, I knew that what we were watching on television at night with millions of people dying and starving to death, and no one else was doing anything because the leadership down there was communist, was Marxist-Leninist, and they were botching things up all the time. And Margaret Thatcher and Ron Reagan took very strong positions. We're not going to help them, but they got that crazy organization down there running the show. And I said to my guys and to the United Nations, well, if no one else is going to lead it, I'm not going to look around and say what happened. I'm going to lead. My government is going to lead. Joe Clark played a tremendous job in this. Michael Wilson found the money for us. And well, I give you the results from the CBC. Brian Stewart is one of their great journalists. Stewart said, he was there. He was the only one there. And he said, they're dying by the thousands every day. And he had pictures of children starving to death right in front of our very eyes. And I said, this is not, no Canadian can put up with this without trying to do something. So we had a major leadership role there. And then that went on to South Africa with Mandela and so on. And there were some difficult days there, as you can imagine. But generally speaking, there's an example of, it didn't get much attention at the time. Was that we were a new government and trying to do our best in a variety of ways and not being successful at all times. So that was it. That's the kind of thing that we were doing, which today people look back on. Hell, a guy from Toronto wrote to me to say that I've just come back from Ethiopia and there's a Brian Mulroney school way in the back country somewhere. Somebody there, realized it and they did something about it. So that's it. That's the kind of thing that was pleasurable. I'll give you another. That was, Canadians will remember the case of David Milgaard. Milgaard was accused and convicted of the rape and murder of a nurse in the winter in Saskatoon. He was found guilty and he was sent to jail for life. He spent 23 years in jail and his mother conducting a campaign for him for years. And it came to my attention just before I went to Winnipeg. I was aware of it, but in a precise way. I was told that when I went to Winnipeg for some meetings, that Mrs. Milgaard was going to organize a protest or what have you outside the hotel. And so the RCMP, my security detail, said to me at the end of the meeting, we have to go out the back door, Prime Minister, because they've got a big demonstration out in front. I said, listen, I've never gone out the back door in my life, and I'm not going to start now. So I go out and I meet Mrs. Milgard, and this was quite an event. You know, I couldn't say anything of substance because the Justice Department had already closed the case. Their argument, not a foolish one, their argument was that this had gone through the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court and what have you, and there was nothing the Justice Department could do, and they were closing the file. That's where we were. So I listened to Mrs. Milgard, and I got on the plane, and from the plane I called Huey Siegel, who was my chief of staff. I said, now Hugh, I want to see the Minister of Justice in my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And I met the minister, and I was told what I've just told you. And I said, that's not good enough. I want to reference this to the Supreme Court of Canada. Have them take a look at it. And the minister said, well, she's not going to argue with the Prime Minister on an issue like this. And so we we sent a reference to the Supreme Court of Canada after this. Two things. First of all, he had been in jail for all those years in maximum security. And he called his mother later. She asked for two things. Can you get him into a better spot? And can you do something about this condemnation? So I ordered that he be transferred to a prison. And he called his mother when he could, and he said, in tears. And he said, Mom, this is the first time I've felt the wind or seen the sun for all of these years. So I transferred him, made sure he got transferred. This went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rendered a decision 9-zip. Not that he was innocent, but that he wasn't guilty. And he was paid a large sum of compensation, and he got on with his life as best he could. 5 years later, the DNA having evolved, they found that he couldn't have done it, but they found the DNA of a guy by the name of Larry Fisher, who had murdered and raped this young nurse in Saskatoon, and he went to jail. Now, he was like Mandela in the sense, he could have died in jail. And he was innocent, 100% innocent. This man lost his life, and his mother and his family sacrificed so much. This is not a Canadian position that I could defend. And so that's the kind of decision, personal, not everybody knew about it, of course, that gives you great satisfaction. As he called me the other day, David Milgard. He's living out in Alberta now. And he's working on similar cases to help other people. But that's the kind of decision, Tim, that was personal, was almost private almost, but that gave me great satisfaction, because it's the kind of thing that only a prime minister can do. His case was buried in the Justice Department forever. And we were able to change that and correct a grave injustice, which I think is what a Canadian prime minister is there to do. So that's the kind of decisions that come upon you, some important, some less important. But the idea is to move the country along.
No, thank you, Prime Minister, for sharing both of those stories. We should feel very proud about what we did to fight back against the famine under your leadership, and the Milgard story, heartbreaking. Prime Minister, if I could, I want to move it on to housing at this point in time. And Canadian realtors will always remember that housing was a big part of your focus in government. I mean, just look at the record. Your government had many impressive accomplishments to reinforce the value of home ownership across Canada. You personally were a champion of more Canadians becoming homeowners. In fact, I benefited from your program later in life because you're the guy that brought in the home buyers plan back in 1992. We can dip into our RSPs, we can buy a home, and we can also cut down our down payments with insured mortgages, first-time buyers from 10 to 5%. Like those two changes alone opened the door to so many of us, including me, to become homeowners. So, Prime Minister, why was supporting home ownership so important to you personally, and what drove those decisions back in the late 80s, early 90s?
Well, it was important to me, Tim, because it's a vital part of one's dignity. And it's not just the home. it's a statement that you and your family are moving on and up in life when you acquire property. It is the principal asset of most Canadians, their home, and it's not, as I say, just a building. It's a sense of pride that your family is doing much better, and you can afford this kind of a nice home. There was an attachment to that because of my own situation way back in Baie-Comeau, when shortly before he died, my father acquired a small mill home for $14,000. And that was the first and only asset that he ever had. And I could sense his own pride. He was an electrician in the paper mill. He had 6 kids living in a small mill house. But the company realized what we've just been talking about, and they made conditions so easy for the employees, like my dad, that he acquired the home for a period of time, and he would sit there like a king in a castle. This was the happiest guy in the world. He'd look around at this, what is really a small mill house, but for him, it meant everything. So I was aware, of course, of that sentiment, and my father was like every other father, proud Canadian, but this gave him an extra leg up in his value of himself. Guess where I am? I finally succeeded. He was 61 when he died, but the years before, he was proud as a peacock, as they used to say. And so we took action, conscious of that stream of thinking. We took action. Michael Wilson was fabulous. And so we took action to provide that support, and it worked out very well, I'm happy to say.
I'm going to ask you for your advice on a related topic. You made those big gains. Many of us have benefited from that. And you mentioned the story about your dad. And that's what our members do every day, trying to give people a leg up in life and own a home. But Prime Minister, there's been a lot of talk in Ottawa recently about peeling back the capital gains exemption on a primary home. There's been a lot of talk about a new tax on home equity. I mean, that could rob Canadians of their biggest source of savings for retirement. It's a crime against the middle class. You have talked about how homeownership helped build the middle class. It's a dream that 90% of Canadians aspire to. So what advice would you have for us, our Realtor members, when it comes to trying to stop this kind of new proposed tax grab?
Well, you got to make certain that the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois and the NDP, everybody, this is a nutty idea. This has got to be extinguished right at its inception, and it's just about now. What they should be doing is looking for ways, as we did, to try and make it easier to acquire these properties, not penalize people for working their way up in society to a point where they can consider, for the first time, acquiring a home for their family. This is nuts, and it has to be dealt with in a very strong position. And I think you're going to have a lot of support in the House of Commons and elsewhere. Certainly the provincial governments as well. Quebec and Ontario, for example, would consider it nuts as well, and would be willing to help the industry in a major way.
Prime Minister, my last question, and I want to thank you for being incredibly generous with your time, and just loved hearing the stories you talked about, some of the epic moments in our history. You had historic success in politics, and throughout your career, you also displayed a joy for public service, a joy in your commitment to helping Canadians right across our country. And as you know, our members, realtors, they're probably the most civically engaged profession out there.
Are they ever?
So thinking about the audience then, Prime Minister, many are home right now, and I hope maybe they'll put their name forward, run for school board, for local council, provincial or federal politics. So reflecting on what you've learned over the years, what's your advice for realtors who might want to throw their hat in the ring?
I think it's a great idea. They're very close to the people. The realtors are very, very close to the people, and they know what's going on. They know what's cooking. None of this 3 martini lunches stuff, in Montreal and Toronto. And and I think it's a great idea. Many of our great leaders have come from the municipal field and the provincial field. Many of them, and it's a way to understand the problems of people in a tangible way. And the as in Quebec they'd say les solutions terre à terre. You know, the solutions that can only come from the street. When you're listening to people who are there, it's like I think, Tim, if I were to say that, you asked me a question about a certain event in the White House with President Reagan, say, well, whether you agreed with me or not, you'd have to acknowledge that I was there, and I speak from firsthand knowledge. It's different from a university professor saying, when Mr. Mulroney was in the White House, this is the way it went. How the hell would he know? And it's the same with the realtors. They know on a day-to-day basis, they're selling basic properties. They're bringing happiness to people. They know what motivates people. And this is a very, very important consideration in our lives. I mean, some of our great leaders have come from municipalities and continue to do so and provide. Look, public service is a very noble effort on behalf of those who, it's not every day, it ain't pleasant. Sometimes when you're prime minister, you wake up in the morning and you've got every newspaper in Canada got you on the front page, and the headline is, could mean, what a dummy have we got as prime minister. God, if I were there, I'd do a hell of a lot better than Brian Mulroney. And some days I think they were right, but the truth of the matter is that, the realtors and like you and I as well, we learn that achievement is a step-by-step item. But you have to understand that each step is going to impact somebody back in Kelowna or Baie-Comeau or what have you. An ordinary Canadian who's living with the pressures of trying to raise a family, make a buck, and do well by his fellow citizens. And very few people can make that tie-in, understand the interaction of policies and its impact upon ordinary citizens. Nobody understands that reality more than the realtors of Canada, because they're in it every day. This is what they do. This is what they live. This is what they know. And so I hope as many as possible get involved in this, because the leadership of Canada doesn't depend just on the prime minister and the big shots in government kind of thing. It depends. It's people. We talked about leadership. There's also followership. If you're out there and nobody's following you, or accepts the implementation of your plans, it's a frosty Friday for you. But as I said, you have to keep going. As I said in the free trade debates or the free trade campaign of '88, because we started out the free trade thing with very few supporters, and I was getting the hell kicked out of me by the Toronto Star and the university professors and the Liberals and the NDP. And I said at one point, this has been a tough slog. And the whole campaign, because at one point, my support was down to members of my immediate family. So, but you have to keep going. And I'm sure your partners in your initiative, your members, do that every day. We got to keep going. Because at the end, because you're adopting a noble attitude and a noble practice, you can bring great happiness to Canada and to people of Canada in their own homes. And the pride and the extraordinary goodness that brings to him and his family, it's extraordinary. So keep up the good work.
Very inspiring words to close, Prime Minister. Thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your time, your insights today, and we're tremendously privileged to welcome you to our event. All the best to Mila, to the family, and thank you again for an outstanding participation at the Realtor Party Conference.
Thank you very much, Tim, and my best to you and Deb, but all the members of your association. They're admired in their own communities, and they're helping to build Canada. So thank you all very much.
Well, that brings us to a conclusion of the fourth and final episode of our 2020 Ontario Realtor Party Speaker Series. I want to thank my guests, the President-elect of OREA, David Oikel, the Ontario Liberal Party leader, Stephen Del Duca, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, the Green Party of Ontario leader, Mike Schreiner, and of course, Canada's 18th Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. I hope you've enjoyed this series as much as we have. And if you missed our earlier episodes, well, shame on you, but you can make up for it by going to OntarioRealtorParty.com to watch them all. All 4 episodes are going to be up for just 1 more week on our website, so go check them out and tell your friends. A big thank you also to Zillow, our episode sponsor, and thank you for watching. And look out for next year for a bigger and, let's hope, in-person Ontario Realtor Party Conference. We're going to do it better than ever with the big names in Canadian and U.S. politics. Until then, I'm Tim Hudak, and we'll see you next time.